I'm sorry for the delay caused by me. Well, I had to be still in my office today, that's why I'm late, and unfortunately the road from Rzeszów to Lublin is not so good. I really hope that a better road will be built interconnecting these two beautiful cities. So this is a letter sent to the chairperson of the organizing committee, Professor Starosławska, from the Marshal of Subcarpathian Voivodeship. Dear Director, dear guests, I'm sending you my words of praise on the conference of raising the subject of depersonalization and dehumanization in the context of life of St. John of Dukla. I'm glad that this event is part of his anniversary, birth anniversary. As Marshal of the Voivodeship, I'd like to stress that this year has been an opportunity for many events commemorating St. John of Dukla taking place in our region and beyond its borders. This is the place where he was born and worked, and even in the course of centuries, after so many years, he's part of the living memory and spirituality of the region. So life and works of St. John of Dukla, view of the risks and perils caused by current civilization, is particularly important. So I'm really glad to see that you work towards solving the key problems of medicine and human dimension of moral character of human life. And in my capacity, we try to make sure that the standards of medical care in our region are constantly raised and provided at the highest possible level. To give you some examples, we initiated a program of nanotechnology for inhabitants of our region at our city hospital. And I'm really glad to see you discuss matters connected to the personalization of human life. And your voice is extremely important because it restores human life its proper dimension, sense and place too. So thank you very much for making us part of these commemorations of life of St. John of Dukla, and I wish you many interesting debates and disputes about the condition of contemporary human being. So let me send my words of praise as the Marshal of the Voivodeship. So I would like to concur with these words and wish you fruitful debate and lots of health and success.
Dziękujemy bardzo panu marszałkowi za te słowa. Dziękuję panie wicemarszałku, że zechciał pan je przeczytać.
Thank you for reading these words and thank you for your presence. Please stay with us. In a moment, we'll have yet another lecture from Bishop Grzegorz Ryś, Auxiliary Bishop from Kraków Diocese and head of the history of Middle Ages, and the author of many publications. So please, Mr. Bishop, I'm giving the floor to you. It's about Franciscan humanism. Excellencies, magnificencies, distinguished guests, I'm a bit bashful to talk about St. John of Dukla with so many Franciscans present here, but sometimes words of an amateur matter too. So in this context, I will tell you about humanism of Saint Francis of Assisi. So just like an amateur infatuated in with St. Francis. St. Francis was born in 1082, so at the end, 1122, at the end of the 12th century. 12th century is usually perceived as a century of an important breakthrough in the history of Europe. Jacques Le Goff called this century as explosive in the history of Latin civilization, saying that that century witnessed a true demographic explosion. The population of Europe almost doubled, which can be best seen at the example of Italian cities, the area where St. Francis was from. Quite often you can see double lines of walls surrounding the cities. The first one was built well before, and the second at around the 13th century. Some cities, well, sometimes developed almost 4 times in that period, both in terms of the size and population. So that was the age of deforestation, development of cities. It was also the age of a true boom, economic boom. Its effects in the 12th century, well, they were similar as those in the 20th century in Poland, meaning that the number of poor people boosted considerably. Never in the history of Europe had there been so many poor people as at the turn of the 12th century. So that was also a moment of the social order, governing entire societies. This order had been present in ideas earlier, but it crystallized in the 12th century. It was divided between those to work, pray, and pray, labor, and pray. And that was also a period of a great intellectual renaissance, and also monastery renaissance, and also scientific renaissance, development of schools, culminated by first universities. So in general, it was the age when the true modern European society was born. So it was a truly explosive age, and it was a turning point for Christian spirituality. And this turning point was very much in discovering the human being as an individuality, and in the fascination with the human being. So St. Anselm of Canterbury asked the question, why God wanted to be a human being? What's in the human being that God wanted to be one of us? So the fascination with the human being, his motivations, various forms and interpersonal relations. So what is important is in this interest in the human being, this 12th century humanism is, or was manifested not only in a very sublime theological considerations, but it goes lower, where life really goes on in any rural or city parish. And well, it can be best seen by the practice of penance. It was the so-called tariff penance. Well, it all started when Europe was evangelized by Irish monks, and you could get those penance offerings every 20 years. And it was used quite mechanically. Nobody asked you about the level of moral consciousness of the person, awareness of the person who committed the sin, or freedom to act. Now everything like that became important, and penance books were replaced by theological treatises. And you have a restoration of the concept of caring for the soul, cura animarum. So this is a breakthrough also in spirituality. If you want to look for a concept that would put together this or express this breakthrough versus the human being and the fascination with the human being. So this all-encompassing concept would be the concept of a person as a God, imago Dei. And again, it's not only about what's preached or lectured at universities or theological school. It is in this practical dimension of rebuilding the image of God in a human being. So never before the 12th century had there been so many structures developed that serve the very purpose of rebuilding the image of God in a human being.
Amongst those multiple and many tools and instruments from the 20th century, and in a moment where I will swiftly move to St. Francis, don't worry, we need to emphasize Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. In his humanism, he took as a point of departure the principle, namely, man, learn about yourself, which in his belief was a divine statement. What happens in a human being when she started to learn more about themselves? The human being starts to discover their dignity and the misery that comes from the sin, and this dual recognition of oneself being a great act of creation as imago Dei and being a miserable sinner as a peccator creates a call for work to restore that affinity with God. According to Bernard Clairvaux, this resemblance of God as a free will. Christ died because we were to regain the free will. This is a tool to adhere to God, to Lord, and love is an experience in which man meets God. And Bernard emphasizes that every human being, not only a believer, not only Christians and the so-called infidels, are the protagonists of the most important text on love by Bernard, the Diligendo, in which he emphasizes the ability of a human being to love, which also leads the non-believer from love focused on oneself to the perfect love to God. This is a specifically human experience and not specifically Christian experience, as Bernard emphasizes. So this sets a context and and then wraps up the works of the 12th century. And St. Francis was born in early the 20th century, and many of the teachings by St. Bernard you can find also in the works of St. Francis. I'm not going to exhaust the whole topic, but I'd like to draw attention to a few things. The first text by Francis is Admonitio, which is number 5. This text number 5 reads, let me quickly translate it from Latin. So this is what Francis basically says. Beware, man, to what dignity God elevated you. He created and shaped you in a resemblance of the image of his Holy Son, and as a semblance of himself spiritually. So that aspect of theology of the 20th century that emphasized the humans being imago Dei, and by the way, admonitio refers to all and is not a text reserved to the provincial order governors and generals, but to all the monks. So he reminds us of man being a picture or image of the God. So he is the image and semblance of God. So that basically emphasizes two dimensions of man: excellence and dignity. So one is a quite corporeal dimension, because of his body, a man is an image of God by body. And there is also a resemblance to God by spirit, but in his exceptional dignity, man participates in that exercise as the image of God. So we can recall the 12th chapter of St. John's. So the human is an image of God by its body, or his body, and resembles God by its spirit. So this approach to body was very important in view of the heresy, which was quite widespread. It is called as the popular heresy of the Cathars, who restores the ancient Manichaeism that led them to rejection of salvation and dignity of human body. They regarded body as a sort of prison in which devil would have imprisoned the angel of light, that is the human soul. So that was the view by the Cathars. For Francis, body is never something bad. In one of his letters, he describes the incorporation by saying that Christ adopted the body and our frailty of our humanity. So that body renders man frail, but it doesn't mean that a human is weak, is bad. He may be weak, but he is certainly not bad. So if the person is deplorable as misère, it's not because she has a body, but because of guilt and sin she commits. So because of that guilt, we are misers, we are deplorable. It's not because of the body, but propter culpa, because of our own guilt. We commit a bad deed, and then we are those who are miserable. There are texts in which St. Francis calls the body an enemy. Sometimes he refers to the body as a brother donkey, or easel. In Admonitio number 10, he calls the body an enemy. And by that, he differs enormously from the Cathars, because he is not talking about the body as about a prison. He says, to the contrary, we need to control that body. If body is our enemy, we can vanquish it and control it, and then no other enemy can fight us, or can pose a threat to us. So that attitude by St. Francis to body is fundamentally positive. In the name of the divine dimension, people rejected all what was corporeal. People adhered to that belief, and all the regions of Europe stuck to that heresy because those who believed in it were leading a really logical life in ecstasy and poverty. So that appealed to the present people. That is what created the heresy and mass movement. People created anti-churches, and St. Francis claimed that even though our body is frail, it is still good, and through that body, God speaks to us. We are talking about Admonitio 5. In the first sentence, he emphasizes dignity. Look, man, what dignity that God elevated you to, and all the creatures under the sky, according to their nature, serve to be obedient to the Creator much better than you. Even demons could not crucify him, but rather you crucified him, and now you crucify love through your weaknesses and sins. This is the image of the human being that Francis defined in 12th century. So on one hand, there is this dignity, and on the other pole, there is this misery. In his opinion, the man is the greatest creation by God, but on the other hand, he is the most miserable creation. And as demons crucified God, now we do the same, we commit the same sin. When we take the Sun Song by St. Francis, he exhorts all the creatures to praise Lord. He starts by calling the sun to do that, and he calls the sun to be the image of God by its splendor, its light, and its beauty. Also moon, stars, water, earth, and others praise Lord. We know that text. And the humans can do it only by pardoning, by forgiving others. This is what the Sun Sermon tells us. And we read also that humans are threatened by the sin, which offers redemption in forms of bodily death. Francis says that the humans should do it with a lot of humility. Regula non bullata, it has not been finally attributed to St. Francis, but it's still a beautiful text. In the 23rd line, we see the thanksgiving prayer. He thanks the Lord for all the gifts by the Lord, and the first and foremost is the gift of creation of man, which was created in the image of God and inserted in the paradise. But soon thereafter, the man lost it by his own guilt. And we have redemption, freedom in Christ, the true God who has been created a human by birth from Mary, from Virgin Mary. So humans are divine by its nature, but through their deeds we deserve the term miserein peccatoris. And St. Francis called the monks not the minor friars, but the misery friars. So this offers us a backdrop of a tremendous shift in the Christian spirituality, which has been focused on the human nature of Jesus Christ and on the most human moments of his life, that is, birth and death of the Son of God. So from this moment on, Europe starts living it at various levels of significance, from the rich who influenced the course of things through those poverty-stricken who kneel in the churches in front of the crosses. So excellence on one hand and misery and peccatoris on the other. So the question arises quite naturally, what is the value of a human being? For Saint Francis. And here is the answer. No, read it at Admonitio 19. I will read it in Latin. It sounds much more beautiful than Polish.
Tantum est et non plus. Jakim jest człowiek przed Bogiem, to takim jest.
What man is in front of God, so is he, and nothing else, nothing more. So God is exclusively what it seems to appear in the eyes of God. Consequently, in Admonitio, Francis exhorts that woe to those monks who are elevated to earthly positions and they don't want to step down. Blessed be those who offer humility amongst the peers, and those who shall be happy, who give the same, pay the same respect to the sick and the healthy. You should value both at the same value. You should also value those who are far away and those who are close, even though those who are far away, you can speak ill of them. So these are the verses, the texts, which lead us to a text that is a summary of all that, and which is the will of Saint Francis, and we should quote that, I believe, if you are contemplating humanism and dehumanization in medicine. Francis wrote up his will at the end of his life, reminding what converted him, and he speaks about that conversion as a favor. He writes that the Lord guided or gave him that favor, what was what was bitter became now sweet, but for this to happen, you need to revalue things. Previously, to him, the sight of the lepers was one of the most better sights that he experienced. But now, Lord offered him a favor which transformed him completely.
And that was the reversal of the order, seeing dignity and magnitude in those people that were put outside them, that were not allowed to belong in the society, and the society shirked away from them. And its very essence, the conversion of St. Francis was a challenge to any order. That was the order of the world of that time. And it very often, this order valued people who mattered, was on top, and those who were down below of the social ladder didn't matter. And St. Francis showed that anyone is similar in terms of the dignity. Those at the bottom of the ladder are no lesser than those at the top, like the popes. And Chesterton put it quite nicely in his book about St. Francis. He said that he showed his respect to the human being when he bowed down before the leper. And that is the most important point of reference for the human being in any social perspective, whether you are a learned person, a man of clergy, or a layman, or anyone. Equality comes from that. Everyone is equal in the eyes of God. And there is no discrimination here. So this is this radical humanism that at the end of St. Francis' life, and brothers Franciscans, don't beat me for saying that, that was the area of some battle towards the end of his life. And you can see it in many texts. In his testament, he said, you couldn't write and you were subject to everyone. We were idiots, illegible idiots, subject to everyone. So those illegible idiots cannot be interpreted literally, in the sense that they were dim because they were born in poverty and didn't have money to go to school, illiterate. He was writing in very good writing, Latin, and he was well versed in Latin, and his attitude towards learning is well known, as he wrote a famous letter when he wrote, I like it that you teach brothers theology, but don't extinguish the spirit of godly piety. But he had nothing against lectures. He didn't have anything against education. And it wasn't that he was an idiot himself because of the fact that he was born to a lower status. He's illiterate out of his choice. And this is a choice of belonging. This is a choice of solidarity. This is not a disability. This is not a burden of fate. This is something that he opted for. And in this solidarity, this is how I see it, at the end of his life he was left almost alone. In a very well-known text, in the so-called Dicta, about true and perfect joy, in 1223, before the letter to St. Anthony. And in this text, perhaps you can remember that he wrote about a situation when he comes to a monastery to visit his brothers. It's during the night, icicles hanging down due to the frost hurting his legs. He knocks at the door, introduces himself, says, "I'm Francis." And the gatekeeper says, "Go away, you are the only simpleton and the only illiterate."
Tu es unus, simplex et idiota.
So you are the only simpleton and idiot. He was the only one left behind in this circle. And the gatekeeper just let him know that even more. And there is a number of us that we don't need you anymore. So when he keeps asking, well, go to crucible fighters, perhaps they will admit you.
prostak i niepiśmienny, to znaczy
Well,
niepotrzebny.
being a simpleton and illiterate means that you are no longer necessary. You cannot make a human being any less dignified by saying that
Niczym nie może nam posłużyć. To
the person
jest,
is of no worth
to jest rzeczywista
and of no use.
stygmatyzacja
And this is
człowieka,
this is how
którą
a
Franciszek
human being is
myślę, mógł
stigmatized.
kompletnie inaczej przeżyć i
That
przewartościować
was probably
później, kiedy się
experienced
znalazł na Lavernie. I kiedy
by
otrzymał
St. Francis
stygmaty. To
a
znaczy,
year
ta
later in
stygmatyzacja
Lavernia when he
ze strony
received
jego
stigmata,
własnych braci została przez niego przeżyta jako łaska i
and it
solidarność z Jezusem Chrystusem
wasn't
przeżywana.
was experienced as a grace and solidarity with
Więc mamy tak,
Jesus
mamy
on the
trąd,
cross.
nędzę,
So we have leprosy,
niepiśmienność, brak
poverty,
wykształcenia. To jest
illiteracy,
to, co zarówno
no
w wieku
education,
XIII, jak i w
what
XXI
both in the
można postrzegać jako
13th
takie
and
prawdziwe
21st
kłody
century
na drodze
you
do tego,
can
żeby
see
człowiek przeżywał swoje
as
człowieczeństwo w
obstacles
sposób godny, sensowny,
against
pełny. Dla Franciszka
human
te kłody stały się
dignified life. For St.
solidarnością,
Francis, these obstacles were
przeżywaną cnotą
poverty, solidarity, and humility.
i dlatego się złożyły
This is
na
how
takie
he saw
człowieczeństwo,
them,
na
and
takie
this
chrześcijaństwo,
put together
które do dzisiaj jest intrygujące i
created
porywa
his humanity and his Christianity that moves us all today. So thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękuję
for
księdzu
listening.
profesorowi.
Thank
Proszę
you
pozostanie na
also,
scenie. Chcielibyśmy
and please stay on the stage.
podziękować i
We'd like to
wręczyć
thank
pamiątkowy
you
medal
and give you a
związany z
commemorative
kongresem, którego jesteśmy
medal
uczestnikami. Ksiądz biskup profesor
for
Grzegorz
the
Ryś
occasion of the Congress.
przedstawiał Państwu
and
założenia
Bishop
radykalnego humanizmu
Grzegorz
świętego
Ryś
Franciszka. Piękny
presented
wykład. Dziękujemy serdecznie.
The foundations of St. Francis's humanism in his lecture.
Szanowni
So
Państwo,
thank you very
przed
much,
nami kolejny
dear
gość,
guests.
kolejny wykład.
Yet
Pan
another
profesor
lecture.
Steven Narrett jest znanym
Professor
cenionym
Steven
naukowcem,
Narrett
który zajmuje się dziedziczną predyspozycją do nowotworów. Ja bym chciała bardzo mocno podkreślić, że prace profesora Narretta miały ogromny wpływ na wdrożenie właściwych metod postępowania terapeutycznego, właściwych metod leczenia, jeśli chodzi o raka piersi w Polsce. Pan profesor współpracuje od wielu lat
a program
z polskimi
of
naukowcami
breast cancer.
i jest z nami także pan profesor
Cooperated
Lubelski, z którym pan
with
profesor
our
Narrett
scientists
współpracuje.
for
Witam panie
many years.
profesorze.
We have
To
also
powitanie dla
Mr.
pana profesora
Professor
Lubelskiego, a pana
Lubelski,
profesora
who
Naroda
worked with Professor
zapraszam
Narrett,
i
and I would
prosimy o
like to
wykład.
ask Mr. Narrett to come to the stage and deliver his lecture.
Thank you very much. Well, we're changing topics a little bit. I'll speak slowly, I think, so everyone can follow. It's also the 20-year anniversary of the discovery of the BRCA1 gene from 1994, which is not such a long history of St. John, but it's still a history of progress. And much of the progress has been in this country. Particularly, I want to stress that tremendous amount of the research progress has been conducted in Poland. We've been working throughout the country, but the research I'd like to highlight today, predominantly done with the collaboration of Professor Lubelskiej in Szczecin, although there are many others contributing, Dr. Lehman in Gdansk, for example, with us today. But we've been working for 20 years throughout the country, and many of the centers are represented here. Just to say that in Poland, about 4 in 100 breast cancers are due to BRCA1. So it's not a large amount, but it's quite a representative, particularly in young women. About 10% of breast cancers are inherited, and of those, about half of them, or 1 in 20, are due to BRCA1 mutations. There are many other genes you might have heard of, but the story of hereditary breast cancer particularly is the story of BRCA1. This is a type of family. This is a Polish family. It's a pedigree that you can see the round dots, black dots, represent women in 3 generations who've been diagnosed with cancer, both ovarian cancer, cancer of the ovaries, a highly deadly form of cancer, and the cancers also in young women, I think in their 40s, breast cancer. So these are representing a serious form of cancer, ovary, which goes along with a hereditary form of breast cancer. In fact, in 1991, I think I wrote the first paper with Dr. Henry Lynch describing the hereditary breast ovarian cancer syndrome was due to gene BRCA1 families that looked like that. So that goes back to 1991. That was a report. Shortly after that, in fact, 1 year after that, cancer genetics was firmly established in Poland, largely through the efforts of Professor Lubelskiej and the Hereditary Cancer Center in Szczecin, established in 1992. So we've had about 20 years to study with patients and with laboratory the importance of this gene and how we can use that to prevent and treat cancer in Poland. I won't go into detail, but you can see from 94, BRCA1 identified. I think the major paper we discovered in 2012, oophorectomy after breast cancer preventing death, the importance of the ovaries and the breast together. In fact, the particular treatments that have been developed here in Poland. I would highlight 3 studies I'll show a little bit later. In 2000, with Jacek Grunwald in Szczecin, we showed tamoxifen, which is a common drug, can be used to prevent breast cancer in carriers. In 2007, the first studies in the world, a specific chemotherapy, a specific drug, highly successful for BRCA1 breast cancers, worked through with Dr. Thomas Bierski, working with us in Szczecin. 2012, a major study with Dr. Huzarski, showing that the combination with oophorectomy, that's adnexectomy, removing the ovaries, treatment of cisplatin, we've now been able to achieve over a 90% cure rate for BRCA1 and breast cancer due to these collaborations. I'll talk a little bit more of that. So which are the questions we have to address? I think one of the very important questions we deal with, not just as doctors, but as a country and as a society, is should we be deciding to test all women in Poland for these mutations? So these are mutations can be identified with a blood test. The blood test is relatively inexpensive. We think it costs 100 zlotys. The cost of the test is low enough that conceivably every woman in this country, let's say 15 million women, could be tested. That's a question for the individual. It's a question for the individual woman to decide, but also would not proceed without the support from society as a whole. Now, let me just say the important thing about this. There's no other country in the world where this is taking place. I suggest it will take place. I suggest it will take place first in Poland, not in the United States, not in Canada. I think the first country to be able to adopt this position should be this country, which is one of the reasons I've been so fortunate to work with this group, because the time is right, the technology is right, and the Polish people as a whole and the women individually have been very supportive. So I'm going to try and explain why I believe this is an important possibility. We can prevent about 12% of ovarian cancers, maybe 5% of breast cancers, which is not a lot, but it certainly represents cancer in families and young women. About 1 in 200 women will carry a mutation. So those 1 in 200 women are about 10 times more likely to get cancer than the average woman. So who has a mutation? Well, women with breast cancer have a mutation, 6 in 100. Women with ovarian cancer have a mutation, about 12 in 100. But the real goal is to prevent the cancer, so we should be testing people before they get cancer, not after they get cancer. The only way to prevent cancer is to test them while they're healthy and then offer a preventive option, which I believe are available. This is why we think in order to find women with mutations, we really should be offering genetic testing to as many women in this country as possible. You could see in the last 20 years we've been quite active. This is our center in Szczecin, where we've identified now 4,000 women who carry a mutation. Probably these women come from all over the country, as I showed in the first slide. These are women with a mutation. You can see increasingly we're continuing to find them. Two things about that. We've probably identified about 10% of the women in the country with a mutation, which is a very good start, but it only represents 10%. If we want to get it to 100%, we'll have to increase our efforts. Is this a goal we should achieve? Secondly, you can see we continue to accrue. We continue to identify. We would like to think that one day, perhaps soon, we will see the curves flatten when we've identified all the women. These women, these 3,000 women with a mutation, have been followed since 1997 to 2013. 206 of them have developed breast cancer, just to show how serious it is. 74 have developed ovarian cancer. Those are really preventable cancers. Total 370 of the women, some kind of cancer. We use those 3,000 women to describe the risk of cancer. These are lines, but I can show that more simply. By age 70, about 52% of the women get breast cancer. About 30% of the women get ovarian cancer. We believe these are preventable. We would rather prevent them than treat them. So these are those numbers. In Poland, about 6% of all women will get breast cancer. Of the women with mutation, it's about 10 times higher, about 50%. In Poland, about 1% of women will get ovarian cancer. Of those with a mutation, it's 30 times higher. It's not everybody, but it's a pretty large fraction. So I wanted to just say, I've been working here for 18 years with our team, with Professor Lubelskiej and others. Many of the big stories we've been telling really originated back in 1998 when the founder mutations were identified. These founder mutations represent really the Polish genetic heritage. In other words, a simple test can identify 3 mutations. These 3 mutations are predominant in Polish women, but they're not exclusive to Polish women. We'll go and talk a bit about that. Going ahead, we found many through establishing resources, which includes clinical information on 18,000 women with breast cancer. We've been able to identify over 1,000 women with a mutation. We have a repository of DNA samples, I think exceeds 100,000. We have a database of breast cancer, which our last study included 18,000 women. Now, that sounds like a lot of women with breast cancer, 18,000, and I can assure you that it is. I can also attest that it's the largest of its type in the world. So the largest single collection of breast cancer patients for research purposes, and entirely for research purposes, has been collected here in Poland. And I think that's a wonderful achievement and a wonderful testimony to the energy and dedication of a lot of people throughout the country. So just wanted to show briefly, without too much detail, some of the major findings that we can recall for the last 20 years. I said there were 3 mutations in BRCA1 The fact that there's only 3 mutations, common ones, makes research more easy. This was the original report of those mutations in 1998, Thomas Bogdan Gurski and colleagues. And just to say, back in 1998, the discovery was based on about 66 families. Now we're up to many thousand families. This was the first report, 35 mutations identified. We have now over 100 times that many, 3,500. Now this is the very interesting story, which was far ahead of its time. Last week I was invited to San Francisco by the wife of the CEO of Google to discuss a new endeavor for genetic testing for women using the internet. They decided, and it was quite controversial in the United States, that they could use the internet to invite women for offering genetic testing, to get the blood, to do the analysis, and to return the information directly to women, rather than going through their doctors, that they could have the opportunity directly to participate in their own health care by getting a blood sample and getting a genetic test result quickly and inexpensively. And there was a lot of discussion about whether this was a good idea or a bad idea. And the reason they invited me to come and discuss that was they said, well, that was done in Poland 10 years ago. Why are we having such a difficult decision now in the United States in 2014? Because I think about 2005, we worked with one of the popular women's magazines in Poland and offered genetic testing for women who clipped in a coupon. And in fact, and that was direct, the opportunity that the women have a direct choice in the matter, that those who choose to have the genetic test could do so, those who chose not. But the idea that it was up to the woman, not up to the government, not up to the laboratory, or not up to the doctor. The first study ever was done here in Poland, and we found, I think it's more than 10 years, it was 2001. So 2001 we did it. 2014 they're discussing whether it should be done in the United States. 5,000 women participated by clipping the coupon. 198 women were found to have a mutation. And by and large, those women were very comfortable and satisfied with the opportunity, and there were really very few that expressed distress, psychological, or familial dynamics, problems with the family. So basically, 2/3 of the women followed the recommendations. 98% said they would recommend testing to other women in their position. I think that was a landmark study because it showed that one could really expand testing on a wide basis so the most number of women could take advantage of it, so the most number of women could have the results and could do it efficiently through the media. Remember I said that there was three common mutations in Poland. One of them is common in Poles and in Jewish individuals. One of them, this is the mutation, the most common mutation. In fact, the most common mutation in the world in BRCA1 is this mutation called 5382 insertion C. And it does tell us something about the Polish genetic heritage, but also that it's common, I don't know if you can see that, with countries that bound it. So we, in fact, originally, this was first found in Jewish women in Canada in our study back in 1994. But since then, we've discovered that it's really better described Eastern European or a Slavic mutation. And these numbers represent the proportion of all the hereditary cancers that are attributable to that mutation. I don't know if you can see that, but it says, for example, Poland is 51%. So this single mutation accounts for half of hereditary breast cancer in Poland. Now, I should say there are thousands of mutations in BRCA1 around the world. There have been literally thousands of different mutations in different women from different countries. One mutation stands out in that, even though there are thousands of possibilities, one mutation counts for half of it in Poland. Certainly, these are older slides, but maybe not that different. You can see, though, it's not restricted to people of Polish ancestry. You see it in women from particularly some of the Baltic countries. We have studied it ourselves in Lithuania, in Estonia, in Belarus, and in Russia with our collaborators. So it is, in fact, a common mutation through there. It's common down through Greece. I think in particular, northern Greece has a strong Slavic component. It's common in all countries where there are Slavic heritage. So it does give us a sense of the ancestry of this particular mutation. I want to just say, so why would I recommend testing? Well, I recommend testing for all healthy women because we think we can prevent the cancers. We can prevent the cancers through drug therapy. We can prevent the cancers through surgery. But we have to do a much better job. This is a recent report, an international study, but led by Jacek Gronwald in Szczecin, showing how effective we can use tamoxifen, which is a well-known drug to prevent cancer, in this case, cancer of the opposite breast. But what was very exciting, the numbers here that to interpret, we found that 1 year of the drug was as effective as 5 years. These are still relatively small numbers, but give us the opportunity to think that we can, in fact, recommend a 1-year drug treatment and get a long-term effect. So that would be a big advantage. We're now discussing actually conducting the clinical study to give women a year of tamoxifen to see how long the protection lasts. This is a second study. You can see this is based entirely on the patients with BRCA1 mutations in Poland, where we followed the patients with, what we've done is we followed several hundred women with breast cancer and hereditary BRCA1 mutation, seen what is the best treatment for them. This was led by Thomas Huzarski, again in Szczecin, an important paper from last year. They showed essentially that the combination of chemotherapy and oophorectomy, preventive removal of the ovaries, was a combination that was strongly protective against death or improved survival. So you can see that these women, without going to the details, they show a strong response to chemotherapy. They show a strong response to having the hormones removed through oophorectomy. So the combination, in fact, we found more than 90% survival in those 233 women. Just to say, to identify those 233 women meant testing 10,000 women over many years. Thomas Bierski, you may know, one of the medical oncologists working with our team, has been particularly interested in using a novel drug, cisplatin, which is not generally given for breast cancer except in unusual circumstances, but found to be particularly effective for these women. And this is a recent paper from this year which shows quite an astonishing result that we gave 107 women cisplatin for treatment for breast cancer, and 61% of them, the breast cancers disappeared completely. In fact, so for 107 women, I think 65 women, the cancer was not visible purely after the chemotherapy. Surgery was done. That surgery showed no cancer cells. This is quite a strong result. It's really the highest ever been seen, I think, for a particular drug for a response to breast cancer. So those three opportunities, cisplatin and oophorectomy, give us the incentive, I think, to test all women with breast cancer. They have a special treatment, what we call personalized medicine. The theme of the conference is depersonalization, but the other side of that coin is the personalization. We're both looking for the same things. We're both looking for personalization for the patient and the treatment of the patient, that the women are treated as individuals and with respect, and we don't get too caught up in the technology and the information and the jargon, that we can speak to the patients as individuals. In this context, we think we speak to the patients with individuals. Knowing the genetic makeup of the woman gives us a chance to give her the best treatment available. So we think it's wise to have that knowledge for every woman now treated for breast cancer in Poland. Still a matter of discussion. This is the single paper which came out this year, 2014, from our group, collaborating with Dr. Lubelski's group, on 3,000 women, which convinces me that all women without cancer should be tested for mutations as well. What we found in this paper was more extraordinary, that for those women, healthy women, who were found to have a BRCA1 mutation, the oophorectomy, removal of the ovaries as a preventive measure, was reducing their cause of death by 70%. What I mean to say, and that's quite an extraordinary claim, is between the age of 30, if one had an oophorectomy between the age of 30, the chance of dying of any cause by age 70 was reduced by 70%, including the causes of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and it was all causes. So that's an extraordinary difference. Feel we should be able to take advantage of that. It was effective for women with breast cancer and women without breast cancer. So healthy women, one does have to discuss with them the consequences of that. Of course, it puts them into menopause and eliminates the chance of having children. These are the issues that need to be discussed. So just to summarize that, I think Poland is really able to lead the way testing all breast cancer cases. As I've said, we've tested about 20,000 cases of breast cancer in Szczecin over the past 20 years. It represents probably 30% of the cases in the country. Big start, we could do better. New treatments are available. We've shown that once women are identified with breast cancer and a mutation, they benefit from mastectomy, they benefit from removal of the ovaries, they benefit from the new drug, or the drug that Thomas Piersky has been working on for 10 years, but also gives us the chance to test other family members and offer to prevent ovarian cancer. Why go further? Why test all women? We like to ideally not be treating the cancers, but preventing the cancers. The test is available. It costs about 100 zlotys. Prevention is available. As I said, unfortunately, the prevention does have side effects, in particular for surgical prevention, menopause, and curtailing of fertility. Screening is available in this country with MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. Nevertheless, we see a 70% decrease in the death from all causes after oophorectomy. The other reason I think it's important that we test all Polish women is many of the women that we see, remember I showed you the second slide where there was a family with 4 cases of cancer. Many of those cases, we would like to prevent those 4 cases. It's not good enough to wait till there's 4 cases in the family to prevent the 5th one. We would like to prevent the first one. the only way to prevent the first case of cancer in the family is to test the women before the cancers develop. So we don't want to wait till the cancers develop. That means we have to test women without a family history of cancer. So to summarize that, about 1 in 200 women have a founder mutation. It's not the cure for all cancers, but it's a big opportunity to make a difference both in the Polish population and also to continue to lead the discovery of how to manage best hereditary cancer and continue for Polish researchers and Polish scientists and doctors and women to have a leadership role that's being noticed throughout the world. The cost of mutation being about 100 zloty means it would cost 20,000 women 20,000 zloty to identify one woman if we tested everybody. And realistically, the possibility of benefit for her life to prevent her from dying of cancer should easily be justified for 20,000 zloty. I'll just want to stop, but before I do, I want to say our new project, which we're working on this week, we're looking for other ways of prevention that are not restricted to surgery. We've been collecting blood samples on 1,000 women that have a BRCA1 mutation to look to see if certain vitamins and certain minerals may be protective. If that's the case, we could offer those as a possible preventive cancer that doesn't involve surgery. We've been starting that study this year. Still too early to know what's going on, but for example, when we looked at the healthy women and looked at the level of copper in their blood, we found among the women with low copper, 6 got cancer. Among the women with medium level of copper, 8 got breast cancer, but high copper, only 1 got breast cancer. I think that's early to say, but it's quite interesting that through this approach, this is a novel approach, we'll be looking for things which predict cancer, and that can be given, hopefully, as a supplement in the diet. For example, we looked at iron. Selenium, which is something we've been interested in for a long time, showed encouraging results as well. For the 122 women whose blood levels had the highest selenium, these just through diet, only 1 developed breast cancer, whereas in the low and the medium, 14 had breast cancer. So we continue to study these women in the registry. It's early to say whether or not we'll be able to prevent cancer by supplementing with selenium, etc., but it's a promising approach, and it will be continuing to evolve over the next 5 years. So hopefully the day will come when we can offer prevention not depending on surgery. And just to conclude, I think we should be thinking as a society here and continue to lead this field, testing Polish women between age 25 and 35, particularly if they're positive, to discuss with them preventive oophorectomy, which reduces their risk of dying of cancer, very similar to women in the general population. I think the information is ready. The time is ready. We should be testing all the breast cancer patients in the country for the BRCA1 mutations. If they're positive, individual treatment include mastectomy, oophorectomy, and the consideration of cisplatinum. More research, of course, needs to be done. And just to I'd like to thank everybody, the organizers, for inviting me to this wonderful meeting and for asking me to present really work that's been done by the Polish researchers, but I've been very active and very encouraged for the past 20 years and hope to work for the next 20 years. Of course, Professor Lubelskiej joining us today and the other members of our team in Szczecin. On the right, you can see my team of researchers and scientists at Women's College Hospital in Toronto, where we've been very actively involved in this collaboration. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, profesor Narod. Dziękujemy bardzo za ten wykład i dziękujemy panu profesorowi za to wszystko, co robi, za całą jego wiedzę, która przyczynia się do zdrowia kobiet w Polsce. Dziękujemy panie profesorze. Pamiątkowy medal związany z kongresem. Dziękujemy jeszcze raz bardzo, bardzo serdecznie. Brawa dla pana profesora. Szanowni Państwo, przed nami przerwa obiadowa. Zaproszę Państwa na 15:30. Wysłuchamy wtedy wykładu ojca profesora Nikanora Austriaka. Mówić będziemy o personalizacji w leczeniu onkologicznym. Prelegentem będzie także pan profesor Jerzy Sztur. Tak więc serdecznie zapraszam. A o godzinie 17:00 rozpocznie się koncert Małgorzaty Walewskiej, jeden z najpiękniejszych głosów świata, więc myślę, że będzie to dla Państwa również przeżycie artystyczne. Dziękuję za tę część spotkania i zapraszam o 15:30. Dziękuję serdecznie.
We are back here at 3:30. Thank you.